It's a well-behaved audience.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Mike McCarron. I'm the chair of the APEX board, and I'd like to welcome you once again to the APEX annual lecture. The lecture seeks to make a contribution through providing ideas or stock-taking about the criminal justice landscape in Scotland, but also, in addition to that, an opportunity for people to meet, to network at the reception, which will follow the lecture and discussion. And therefore, I'd like to thank you who are attending very, very much, because it's really the attendance we get at an annual lecture which gives us the confidence to say, yes, there is scope and there's relevance for having another one the following year. And I think we must be nearing, I don't know what the exact number is now, but it must be nearly in two figures, if not there already. So thank you very much for your support and through your presence here tonight. In terms of information about what APEX has been up to in the last year, our annual report should be being published now and available on our website, and I would refer you there for further information about some of the activities and developments which we've been spending time on over the last year. With regard to the arrangements tonight in terms of housekeeping, you will probably know washrooms are downstairs at the very bottom. There is no scheduled fire alarm, so if one goes, please exit by the doors at the back and down the stairs. The lecture will be for about 30-35 minutes, followed by questions and discussion, which I will help moderate. And we aim to finish at around about 7:30, which leaves us about an hour for the reception, up until about 8:30. So now it's my great pleasure to introduce the speaker for tonight, Sir Stephen House. I'm sure, in fact, he needs little introduction from me into who he is, but he started police work with Sussex Police Authority in 1981, spent time in the London Metropolitan Police Authority before coming to Strathclyde in 2007 as Chief Constable, and was appointed as Chief Constable of Police Scotland in 2012. Already awarded the Queen's Medal, he was awarded a knighthood in the Queen's Birthday Honours in June 2013 this year. The creation of Police Scotland to replace the former regional police authorities has been a radical, a systemic change, a recent change, and therefore a change about which I'm sure in the audience there are still many questions and certainly very strong interest to hear from Sir Stephen about how he sees collaborative working and shrinking budgets. Can we get better value by behaving smarter? So if I may introduce Sir Stephen House and ask him to deliver his lecture.
Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Mike, thanks very much for the introduction. I was nervous enough as it was, to be honest. Now I've been told that if this speech isn't a very good one, you might not do one next year, and it'd be my fault. Only adds a bit more pressure, but I will try and do it justice and at least take an even strain so that you get a sparkling speaker next year. I'm going to speak on the title that's been announced. I am, of course, going to, and I'm quite grateful for the introduction because it said you would be interested in Police Scotland. That allows me to spend a few minutes talking about the organisation that I have the privilege to lead. And I'm going to do that because I think part of my role must be to talk to audiences such as yourself, explain the organisation, the size and scope, the rationale, and a bit of thinking from the person who's leading the organisation at the moment as to where I think we should be going and why. So I'm happy to take that challenge on. So let's begin by looking at Police Scotland. It is, as has been said, the single police service for Scotland. Language is important, and we all trip up sometimes over language, and I don't expect to be beaten up for tripping over it, so I will make the odd mistake myself. But I guess it's important to say it's a police service, not a police force. It's a police service for Scotland. I think it's an important distinction. It's one my father takes me to task over an awful lot, and feels that it's modernism gone mad. I don't believe that to be the case. It is a service, it's a public service. It's a service that has people in it who occasionally are empowered to use force against other citizens, but it remains a service. What are we here to do? Well, we're here, what it says on the tin really, is to police Scotland. That's our role. We've kept our mission very simple. We've kept our mission statement very simple. It is very simply keeping people safe. We have just over 17,300 officers, a very important figure, particularly for some of the senior civil servants in the audience, who check on it regularly. But it is 17,300 and a few at this moment in time. We're also supported strongly by 5,600 police staff, unsworn staff, and about 1,400 special constables. It makes the organisation the second largest police service in the United Kingdom, behind the Metropolitan Police. And you learn new facts all the time. So, for example, the Met polices, I'm told, 620 square miles. We police 31,510 square miles. So there's a bit of a difference. And I'll not go into some of the other details, but obviously we provide a service to the whole of the population across the country. Our budget, which is a particularly important figure for this speech and this audience, is just about £1 billion a year. What does the size mean? To me, the size means you cannot police Scotland as a single entity. One size fits all does not apply. There must be common standards, there must be common ethics, but the population of Scotland demands and deserves individual policing tailored to their own communities. And I hope as I go through my address to you, you'll see that that's what we are trying to deliver. I've long been a champion of reform. I was in the voting stakes for a single service before it became financially the right thing to say. I was in favour of it for non-financial reasons. To me, it makes financial sense as well, but that actually is a secondary purpose. The main purpose was I thought it was a better way to police Scotland. Reflecting on the way over here, I've been in the job approaching now 12 months, not far off 12 months, and Police Scotland's been up and running for just over about 22 weeks now. I am confident in saying that everything I've seen since I took the job on, but more importantly since the 1st of April, tells me that the decision was the right decision. And also tells me that to do nothing, to stay as we were, would have become increasingly unsupportable in Scotland's economy. Now, the aims of police reform, as set out in the legislation, there were three business benefits expected. Firstly, to strengthen the connection between police and the community. Secondly, to create more equal access across Scotland to specialist policing. And thirdly, to protect and improve local policing services within the available budget. Now, keeping people safe is at the heart of policing across Scotland, and it sits at the centre of our operational strategies. We consulted with just under 20,000 people in building what we believe to be our priorities that come from the public. So just under 20,000 people were directly consulted. We obviously spoke to a whole range of groups as well, and colleagues and partners. 4 key areas emerged as the real standout areas as far as our consultees were concerned, and they were antisocial behaviour and alcohol-related disorder. Road safety was the second one. Drug dealing and misuse of drugs was the third, and the fourth was violent crime. Now, I think it's fairly safe to say that the first 3 of those, the drugs issues, the antisocial behaviour and alcohol abuse, and road safety, affect every community in Scotland. I think a lot of people like to take some comfort in saying, yes, but the fourth priority is actually quite patchy. Many of our communities are not violent. Well, I would address that by saying many of our communities are not visibly violent. You don't see a lot of violence on the streets in many parts of Scotland. But what we are seeing and what we are discovering on a daily basis is there is violence in every community in Scotland. It simply happens behind closed doors, and it's not talked about. And people don't often want to say, yes, domestic abuse, domestic violence is a problem in their community. But it is. Statistically, it is. Together with partners and communities, we've drawn up local policing plans, as we were required to do under the legislation, for each of the 32 local authority areas. But we went one further, and we've drawn up bespoke policing plans for all 353 multi-member wards in Scotland. Now, I'll not pretend to you that these are massive volumes that go into huge detail. They're not. They're fairly simple plans, but they are specifically designed by and for the population in those areas. And just to return to my previous comment, none of the 353 refer as a problem to domestic abuse. So we asked population in all 353 wards, what are the three things you are most concerned about and you'd like the police in Scotland to do something about? The common denominators were road safety and driver behaviour, drug misuse, antisocial behaviour, and in a number of urban areas in particular there was violent crime. There were lots of other things as well. Acquisitive crime in certain areas was a significant issue. Nowhere did we see violent crime. Nowhere did we see child protection issues. We didn't see dealing with sexual predators. We didn't see dealing with organised crime. We didn't see dealing with fraud. These are some things which I think the public probably expect us to be getting on with, but don't want to talk about necessarily openly. The golden thread, though, that we took from all this was that we have to, at a bare minimum, respond to the concerns of the local population in their localities. And that's what we are trying to do and are aiming to do. The national service that we've now set up does allow us to share our expertise across the whole of the country. So no matter where people live in Scotland, no matter how remote, they can expect access to the same level of specialisms. To do this, we've created a number of national units who are able to deploy across the country. So, for example, our air support unit, which is a fancy police way of saying our helicopter, covers the whole of the country now. It didn't used to, because it was bought and paid for by government and by the Strathclyde Police Authority, so it was their helicopter, and occasionally they would let it stray beyond Strathclyde, but not very often, and they would often charge if it did. Now it covers the whole country and has been deployed across the whole country. So, for example, it's been deployed looking for missing persons in rural Perthshire. Just a few weekends ago it was in Aberdeen, above the city centre, and it's also been in Edinburgh city centre, helping officers deal with an armed siege situation. We also have set up a specialist crime division, and they can and do, and did very recently, deploy highly experienced, well-trained detectives to murder in rural Dumfries and Galloway. Now, Dumfries and Galloway happens to be one of the areas where violent crime, at least visible violent crime, is at a particularly low level in Scotland. I think most people will appreciate that. They don't experience homicide very often. So it's no surprise then that the legacy Dumfries and Galloway Police Service, when it was probably the smallest in the UK, did not feel it necessary and probably could not afford to maintain its own team of highly experienced detectives investigating murder. And in fact, if they were Dumfries and Galloway officers, they couldn't be highly experienced because they didn't have very many murders to investigate. So that meant that when there was a murder, there was significant abstraction in Dumfries and Galloway from the local officers, and although they were very well trained, they did not have the experience in dealing with the homicides. Sadly, other parts of Scotland do have significant experience dealing with homicides, and our homicide investigation teams, our major teams, are now available to be deployed and have deployed to Dumfries and Galloway to help deal with a recent murder there. Most recently, I guess, in the news, officers from our specialist crime division were deployed in support of the investigation into the helicopter tragedy around Aberdeen. And it's that sort of thing which people don't necessarily think we get involved in. Significant commitment from Police Scotland to help investigate the circumstances to support the families of the victims. Previously, such support would only have been available to the force in that area through mutual aid. It would have taken time to get there. So we believe we're offering now a much more efficient and effective service. And we also are confident that all communities in Scotland have equal access to those specialist resources. I want to say a few words about performance. Many of you in the audience probably know my reputation, which is I am passionately interested in performance. There are some times when I come under a degree of scrutiny as to, are you over-interested in performance? And I think this evening is an occasion for nailing one's colours to the mast. In my view, the leader of a public organisation that has a budget of £1 billion cannot be over-interested in performance. It's not possible. If you show me an organisation, public, private, voluntary sector, that does not monitor its performance, I will show you an organisation that is either failing or is about to fail and doesn't know it yet. Because the public expect people to know what works, what doesn't work, and where should you be spending your money. The trick, of course, is to make sure that you're focusing on the right performance and the right things to perform at, hence the consultation that we've gone through. So we have set up a significant performance regime within the organisation, and it's backed up with software that allows our senior managers on site to be aware of how they're doing in a variety of different specialisms. Now, the one thing that we recognise is that with the performance regime there is always a risk. There is always a risk around ethics. There is always a risk around changing people's behaviour. But you can tell I've had this conversation with a number of people. If you set up a performance regime that monitors performance and it doesn't change people's behaviour, then it's not a very good performance regime, because performance regimes are intended to change people's behaviour, to make sure that they are dealing with the things that the organisation sees and the public sees as priorities. So it will change people's behaviour. That's partly why it's there. However, and this is perhaps the most important point to make, I think, we expect people to behave within an ethical framework. The values of the organisation are integrity, fairness and respect. Now, that's not something that we dreamed up in some super-duper management meeting or some away day and a seminar helped by consultants. Actually, those three words came from our workforce, both police staff and police officers. Those were the things that they valued. Those were the things that they thought were the most important. Those were the things that they thought defined them as members of the organisation. So let me just tell you the words that back it up. Integrity. I understand I'm responsible for my own actions and will exercise my discretion within the law. Fairness. I will carry out my duties fairly and impartially. Respect. I will show respect for all people and their beliefs and values, cultures, and individual needs. I think what these words say is we've tried to go out of our way to make sure that what we are doing is stressing to the officers and the staff that work in the organisation that we want them to deal with people as individuals, not as populations, but as individuals. If you go into the organisation, if you go into any of our buildings, you will see posters, and they illustrate the visions and the values I've talked about. Now, any organisation, most organisations will put up posters, and they are words on the wall. What do I do personally to reinforce the values? Well, ever since I was appointed as Chief Constable in Strathclyde in November 2007, I met with every new recruit into that organisation, and there were probably several thousand of those over that period in time, because it was a time of expansion. And that's a policy I've continued since we've gone live with Police Scotland. And what I talk to every single new recruit about, is values. It's integrity, fairness and respect. How would they like to be treated? How would they like their family and friends to be treated by the organisation? Stress to them that there are many rules and regulations that govern their behaviour and their performance, but actually, so long as they act reasonably, with goodwill, proportionately, with a regard to other people, then they won't go too far wrong. and they will have the support of the organisation. And that's something that seems to strike a chord with the officers and with the staff. I'm not going to go into detail about other issues, but we also have a significant oversight body. We have the Police Authority that was established by the same legislation, which is in place to provide us with our budget, provide us with our strategic direction, to help us with developing our policy, and to hold me to account for the performance and actions of the organisation. That is a very, very strong relationship because it's very one-to-one. And there's been a huge amount in the press about the difficulty of the relationship. Hardly surprising. We've gone through the biggest change in policing we've ever seen in Scotland. We've created new legislation, 2 new organisations, huge amalgamations, at the same time facing significant budget challenges. There are bound to be pressures, and when you cram that into the speed with which it was done, which was quick, then it's understandable that there are tensions around. I'm pleased to say those tensions are easing significantly, built mainly on the fact that, as I've always said this, I say it to virtually every speech, nobody believes it, I'm still going to keep saying it. The Chair and I have a very good personal relationship, always have had, and I'm confident we always will. But it's a relationship that has a tension in it, and I think the legislation intends there to be a tension within it. Challenges for Police Scotland. The obvious one, public sector austerity. We can't forget that one of the drivers behind the creation of the new organisation was to cut out duplication, to improve efficiency, to make change. Change always brings a rise in passions, a concern that the status quo is ending. Well, I'm afraid that's a fairly self-evident point. The status quo has gone. We are in the midst of significant change. I think every organisation, every partner we work with is in the midst of significant change. But we will be missing part of the point of the creation of Police Scotland if we do not secure the savings that we are obliged to secure. We need to reduce our spend, and that will mean tough decisions. Ironically, because policing is so embedded in partnerships, actually many of the decisions we take that are around efficiency, saving money, reducing staff, are bound to affect partnerships. If we were an isolated organisation, we could make all these changes and none of our partners would be affected because we wouldn't have any partners and they wouldn't notice. The reality is we are bound up in our partnerships and people will notice. Just very briefly, the scale of the challenge we face, in my language, it may not be everybody's language, but in my language, we cost about £1 billion. That's how much money the Police Authority give us to run the police service in Scotland. We have to save this current financial year about £60 million. Next year we have to save another £60 million. And in the third year we have to save another £60 million. Let's just be clear about that though. What that equals is that the budget will be £180 million less than it was last year by the end of financial year 15-16. So it's 60 million every year, but it's added on, not just 60 million every year. So 180 million pounds cheaper. Now, some of you may be sitting there thinking, well, that sounds actually not too challenging. And many people in the private sector would say that. Well, if you're talking about £1 billion and you've got a challenge of saving 60, relatively easy. Relatively easy, except I mentioned 17,300 police officers. We are not allowed to drop below that. 72% of our costs are police officers. So 72% of our costs are fixed. So we're left with the remainder, which by my brilliant maths is 28%. A significant portion of that is our support staff. We're not allowed compulsory redundancy. So that means that we can only reduce the number of support staff through early retirement, voluntary redundancy. So there are some anchors to our flexibility around saving the money that we have to save. I take no issue with the anchors, and I'm not saying to you that the anchors need to be pulled away. I'm simply trying to explain why it is that we struggle a little bit more than you might expect to balance the books. I do want to add, because it's something that appears in the media quite a lot, have we started at the top? Well, we have, in terms of reduction and savings of costs. If you look at the chief officer budget for the 8 forces, plus various national squads that existed and look at our spend on chief officers today, it's less than 50% of what it was. Just less. I think it's about 48% is what we're now spending of what we were spending. So we've effectively cut the costs of chief officers in half. And we are looking at other ranks to look to see if we can make reductions there as well amongst senior officers. We are looking across the whole police estate to look at our buildings to see whether or not we can reduce the building stock. And we're looking also at the hours that some of our police offices open to the public to see whether or not that can be reduced. But we're doing that in consultation with our partners, mainly local councils, to see whether or not we can share premises with them or indeed share public contact points with them. We're also working with the fire service, who themselves have gone into a national service, to look to see whether we can use some of their stations, particularly where they have retained fire stations in more rural areas, to see if we can use those for our buildings. So we are trying to be as imaginative and flexible as we can in these areas. We're doing this because we are trying to maintain the policing and the operational footprint that we have, particularly the community policing, so that we do not withdraw from communities, so that public still see police officers patrolling on foot or on pedal cycles, which is what they prefer, in their community. That is our aim. That's what we will try to preserve as much as we possibly can. And so far, because we are at the same number of police officers, we've been able to do that. Let me now just turn then to partnership working and say what I want to say about that. I want to start off by saying, contrary to popular belief mythology, I think I can give you evidence which shows that I am 100% behind partnerships where they are strong, committed and delivering partnerships. And I'm going to give you a number of those examples anyway. Partnership is not under threat from Police Scotland. Some media suggests that much, possibly fueled by partners' concerns about what might be happening in the future, and they're airing those concerns, and we understand that. But we try to give a certain level of confidence that there is a logic to what we are doing. In the context of shrinking budgets, paradoxically, and I'm sure we've all heard this before, it's not a new comment, in the context of shrinking budgets, actually partnerships are more important if they are effective partnerships. If they are duplication or triplication, then they are not effective and they probably shouldn't endure. But if they are partnerships where coming together of partners actually produces more than the single agencies can on their own, then that's effective, it's efficient, and it should be continued to be supported. And we will continue to support those. But I think the public who we serve expect to see their tax pounds spent wisely, and that would be in support of strong, effective and achieving partnerships. Programmes such as the Fife Inclusion, which demonstrate the benefits of working in partnership across public-private sector. It's a collaboration between Apex, Police Scotland, Fife Council, schools to support young people who are repeatedly excluded from schools. Each of the organisation does their own bit, but the success is a 70% improvement in reducing exclusions. We're about to roll the programme out to Dundee, where it's going to be referred to as Inclusion Plus, and that will help to expand the number of interventions with families involved. I've been a police officer for, it says in this speech, well over 30 years. It's not that well over 30 years, it's 32 years to be precise about it. I've seen from my own experience what makes streets safer. And that's pretty simple, really. We need to deal with addiction issues. We need high-quality social housing. We need first-class educational services so people can get employment. We need jobs for people to get. And we need responsive social services and other partners. So whilst I'm charged with reducing crime in Scotland, and I am, I'm very well aware I can't deliver this without a very broad range of partners. So we are committed to working with those partners. It is at the heart of what we do. It's embedded in the way the force operates on a daily basis. Feedback I get on a daily basis is involving partnerships. So I was in Inverness yesterday afternoon talking to the local chief exec in the council in the Highlands, talking to the leader of the council and talking to the directors of services about how proud they were about all the work that Northern Constabulary had done and voicing their concerns about Police Scotland withdrawing from those services. But being honest enough to say, but all we do, we hear rumours and we're reading newspaper stories, but we haven't actually noticed any change. So you're still committed to the partnerships, it's still happening, all those works are still going on, but we're worried about it. I said, well, I understand why you're worried, but I think you have to operate on the evidence and what's in front of you, and that was that strong partnerships were still being supported by Police Scotland locally in Highlands. Partnership is varied and it takes many, many forms, from community police officers working locally with housing officers to national strategic partnerships at governmental level. I'm obliged as Chief Constable to take part in these because the strategic priorities set by the government and by my own police authority emphasise partnership and emphasise prevention. So that points me in that direction. My experience tells me that there's not many policing challenges that are completely new in nature, although cybercrime and the internet is bringing us new challenges on a daily basis. But invariably, colleagues around the country have already met and are addressing the challenges that we face. Our challenge as a leadership team is to identify what's working well and to reinforce that and to scale up good practice. There's nothing wrong, and one of the benefits we have as a national organisation, and I think we're starting to see some of the fruit of that, is if we see something that works well in a particular area and it is reckoned to be scalable and transferable, we can push for a national rollout. And that's something I think personally has bedeviled Scotland in the past. That has not been possible. And there are lots and lots of good practices in different parts of the country that actually remain good practice in different parts of the country, when there are answers, things that work, that can be done, and frankly should be done. So at national level, we are a key partner with the Scottish Government. That was Alex Salmon falling over. We're key partners with the Scottish Government in building safer communities. Not from surprise, I have to say. You have to be so careful, don't you? The initial work of building safer communities is going to focus on reducing violence and increasing community safety and resilience. The challenge for building safer communities is, what does a safer community look like? What's the end game? What are the deliverables? How do we measure progress? These are the sort of things that the partners in that have to ask, have to challenge. We want to understand, if we get success, what does it look like? What do we have to put in to get success? It can't just be well-meaning, well, it seems like the right thing to do. There has to be a plan. Locally, commanders and my 14 divisional commanders are building on very strong relationships in community planning partnerships. Now, that's the direction of travel for the whole of Scotland. We're not in the same place all over the country. We know that because we are all over the country, and we see that our people are in different places with the maturity and development of community planning partnerships. But I'm quite clear it's the way ahead. I have to revert back to an extent to the west because that's where my experience comes from in Scotland. Long-standing partnership between the police and Glasgow City Council, which used to be called Glasgow Community Safety Services. Now it's called Community Safety Glasgow. It was formed as a limited company in 2006 with a simple objective of reducing antisocial behaviour in Glasgow. It's about information sharing, intelligence sharing, it's about joint patrolling, it's about tasking, it's about doing complementary roles. So the officers will attend and deal with the initial antisocial behaviour, perhaps membership of a juvenile gang, but it is officers from the initiative themselves who then go back to the house, talk to the parents about their children's membership of a youth gang, what can be done to overcome it, maybe help them developing some parenting skills to place the proper parental control over children's behaviour. These are the sort of things that police officers are not trained to do and shouldn't be trying to do, but our partners do very well. The approach, we think, works. We've seen a reduction in antisocial behaviour across Glasgow in the last 12 months alone by the last 12 months by 12%, but that's on top of yearly reductions in the last 4 years as well. There are a significant number of other partnerships and people that we work with. In the third sector in particular, I would mention SACRO, I would mention Includum, Action for Children, and APEX. We are, as Police Scotland, keen to work with any capable partner. That's where we come from. So we've recently get more involved with Young Scot, and one of the things we're doing with them, I think influenced and excited by the Commonwealth Games coming up, so we're supporting the Choices for Life campaign. The national campaign started in the police, but we're working with Young Scot to develop a youth volunteer programme across all 14 divisions in Police Scotland, which will take some young people from the age of about 14 up to 17 and give them an insight into the role of the police in society, help them develop citizenship skills, and make them a more positive contribution in our society. The first one is already up and running. We'll be rolling others out over the next few months in advance of the Commonwealth Games. In April 2012, building on established local links, Assist, which is a specialist domestic abuse independent advocacy service, was actually co-located with Police Scotland's Domestic Abuse Task Force. And I think, partly because it's an area I'm passionate about, also it's an area I think particularly well, Assist and the domestic abuse really proves my thesis, I think, or illustrates it at least, on partnership. The police deal with the domestic abuse by turning up to the emergency call. They stabilise the call. They keep people safe. They try and assess the situation, which is not always easy to assess. We do not seek to provide ongoing, lasting support to the victim. That is the role of Assist. We're not very good at it, in all honesty. It's not something that we're designed to do. It's not where our skills lie. It's not where our culture is. We instead deal with the offender. We make sure that the offender gets to court. We make sure that if there are restrictions on his or her behaviour, perhaps through some sort of curfew, that we police that curfew rigorously. We make sure they don't approach. One of the things that we are looking at, because we know it's a hot spot, is where there are children in the relationship and there's perhaps a sharing of the child in terms of a couple of days with mother, a couple of days with father. We know that's a hot spot. So we are looking at plans to ensure that we are in some way policing the handover of that child, because that's where the violence can occur. Equally, where people are trying to recover property from a shared home. And it's something, again, that we look to try and provide some security around. But what we don't do is try and provide the support, long-lasting and long-reaching support to the victim, because that is the role of our partners. There are many other collaborative working arrangements that I could talk about, but I'm not going to. What I'm going to say is this, and it may seem rather counterintuitive to you, but it's a personal belief, and it's this: policing does not solve problems. There used to be a policing philosophy called problem-solving policing, a few years back now. My view is policing doesn't solve problems. We're not a solutions agency. We're a restraint agency. We can control behaviour. We can rarely change it, sometimes, but it's rare. So, for example, in organised crime, we can constantly put surveillance on and deal with serious offenders in organised crime. We can seize their money, we can arrest them, we can put them to the fiscals to go in front of court, we can get them prison sentences, we can do that very effectively. Rarely do we make them decide, do you know what, I'm going to give up this life of organised crime and do something else. Occasionally, very heartwarmingly, actually that does happen. And we have stories of people who now are working in full-time employment and they're not part of crime because, frankly, they're fed up being arrested by the police and they don't want to keep going to prison. Now that, to me, is great. It's quite unusual, if I'm honest. We control behaviour. I think we rarely change it. What changes behaviour is employment where there was joblessness. It's good housing when there was no housing. It's anger management where before there were only fists. It's people helped to beat substance abuse. It's education where there was ignorance. And it's positive, supporting, loving relationships where perhaps before there was only anger, poor parenting, mistrust, and violence. The police do not provide many of those things I've just listed. Our partners do. So it stands to reason, as far as I can see, that I should be committed to partnerships. But I will insist that we remember our unique area. The unique selling point that we have is we're an enforcement agency. We shouldn't try and do the jobs of other people, whether it's in government, local authorities, or in the voluntary sector. We should leave those roles to our expert partners. If any of my cops decided, come into work one day and decide, you know what, today I think I'm going to do the fiscal's job, then I would be getting a phone call pretty quickly from the Solicitor General. And it would be her usual pithy comments, I'm sure, telling me to get my people back in line. Directors of social services would soon be saying to the local divisional commander, look, do you want to just get your cops back online here? You do your job, leave my people to do my job. That's what they're trained to do. Equally, if somebody from a voluntary agency suddenly turned it up one day and said, you know, yesterday I was doing a pretty good job counselling children and helping them find more meaningful routes into adulthood, but today I think, you know, I'm going to investigate a murder, I think we'd probably say something about it. We need to be clear on what our roles are. So what I would insist on is that no partnership should go unreviewed. They should be reviewing themselves. We want to reinforce effective partnerships, and we want to strengthen weaker ones that are capable of doing good things. Partnerships must be precise about the problem they're addressing and the results that they expect to get. Partnerships must be partnerships on a professional basis. They must be relevant, not simply historic. But you've got my assurance standing in front of you that as an organisation, Police Scotland will continue to invest in partnerships. Why? Because successful partnerships keep people safe. Thanks very much.
So, Stephen, now's the opportunity for questions and some discussion. And I'll open out the questions to you. I'll select as fairly as I can and ask Stephen to respond from the platform. So, over to you. Are you able to hear me from standing up like this? Yeah. I see a question at the back in the aisle. We have a roving microphone.
Thank you.
If you would just say who you are and if you have an organisation that you're representing, that would be of interest as well.
I'm Ian Shaw and I'm the Director of Media Education. I'm very interested in the community engagement element and just wondered what you see as the changes that being a national force will make in terms of that connection with the community.
I think it's one of the concerns. As I said, one of the deliverables that the government asked for from a single service was to make sure that community policing stayed as strong as possible within the budget available. Those are not my words, those were chosen. But also that there is an increase in engagement with the community, and that's something which the Chair of the Police Authority himself is particularly keen to see. And if I'm being honest, the increased engagement with the community was one where I thought to myself, well, I'm not quite sure a national service is necessarily going to deliver that aspect as easily as all that at a certain political level. But actually, I think I was wrong about that. So the old system was there were 8 police forces and each one had its police authority. And I think the largest authority was probably Strathclyde, and it had 34 members on it, representing 12 local authority councils. So the bigger authorities had 5 or 6, maybe even more representatives, but many of the smaller councils had 1 or 2 representatives. And the same would apply across the rest of the country. There were locally elected councillors. What we have now is, instead of the 8 police authorities, we have 32 scrutiny authorities. So each council has its own scrutiny arrangement for its policing locally. So it's looking in a far more focused way at its local policing, and that's at the council level. So in some council areas, that's a large area. So Glasgow, Edinburgh, we're talking about big outfits. But in some of the smaller councils, we're talking about very local issues. It's up to the council entirely how they design that scrutiny, how many councillors they have on it, how often it meets, etc. And they've all done slightly different things in many ways. But what's already obvious and what's coming back to me from a number of local authorities is actually there is greater involvement by local councillors in oversight of the policing. They feel they have far more understanding of what's going on locally, and they're also able to ask more direct questions of the man or woman who's in charge locally on the spot. And I think that's an effective development that will continue to develop. That's at the sort of the local political level. At the community level, I'll be completely frank and tell you, my view is if you ask the vast population or the bulk of the population in Scotland to vote on what are the biggest changes been since Police Scotland, they would be a communal and national shrug of the shoulders. I haven't noticed any difference. That is the reality in my view. That's what I get reflected back by an awful lot of people and an awful lot of cops as well. Now, some people would say, well, maybe it's time to hand your notice in there, Chief Constable, and my chair of my authority is sitting there, so I'll be careful what I say. Our design from the start was that the vast majority of the public would not notice a massive change on day one. We didn't want there to be. And the reason for that is every inspection, every review of policing in Scotland going back years says the one thing you're really, really good at is community policing. Actually, it's very, very strong. It's been referred to as the jewel in the crown. We haven't changed very much at all. We've insisted that each multi-member ward has its own policing plan. We're going to be doing that again in our second year, and the consultation for that will kick off fairly soon. We're going to ask everybody that we speak to, what are the 3 things you would like us to deal with? And more crucially, a second question, how would you suggest we go about doing that? We're actually interested in what the public, almost the style of what they want to see. Now, again, I don't think you have to be a rocket scientist to work out the answer that most of them will give you is we want visible policing, please. We want to see more cops. Most parts of our society want to see more police officers on the street because it feeds into well-being, it feeds into making them feel safer. And we do see increasing feeling of safe in Scotland. That's what all the surveys show. And it should, because crime is at a significant low. It's been coming down for a number of decades, and it's very low. Our aim is not to change a winning formula. Our aim is to support community policing in a shrinking budget, and we have to find innovative ways of doing just that. But there are also new communities. We have migrants into the country who are forming new communities. We also have huge cyber communities growing up. And the challenge for an organisation such as ourselves, which is led sadly by advancing middle-aged people like myself, who are not necessarily that technically savvy, is how do we get to grips with social media and deal with the huge community that is out there in a virtual state and communities of interest on internet and other social medias. And that's something that we are looking at, and we're having to run very hard to try and catch up on that. But our commitment to community policing is very, very strong. Again, I'll go back to, we haven't reduced the number of police officers in Scotland since day one, and huge numbers of them are deployed across our communities as community cops. I hope that was at least partly.
Question there.
I'm tempted to ask you because it sounds like you might have an idea, but and I'm happy to receive any ideas. Well, by the by, one of the biggest problems we have with our special constabulary is they keep leaving the specials. And the reason, it's not as bad as it sounds, because the reason they keep leaving the specials is because they join the regulars. It may surprise you to know, I don't know, they say police officers look very young these days, but the average age of a new recruit into Police Scotland is 26. And that's not that different, I think, from legacy forces. It's been around that for quite a while. which means we're taking people with some life experience, and that's really what we're looking for, is some life. We tend to find that people wanting to join at 18 are a little bit lacking in that life experience. Not always, but more often than not. So we tend to take people later on. There has developed, therefore, a bit of I don't know what it is, a phenomenon whereby people who apply to the regulars and don't get in, and sometimes get a message, well, you need more life experience, or maybe come back in a few years when you've seen a bit more, and often interpret that as, I'll join the specials. Now, sometimes it's because they're told, well, why don't you join the specials? So they do. And on occasions, when I welcome tranches of new specials in, 75–80% of them want to join the regulars. And you can usually see that just by their age demographic alone. And the person who's sort of 40, 45 and beyond, who wants to put something back, who doesn't want to become a regular, they're perfectly happy with what they're doing, but they've always sort of wanted to do something, and this is something. They're not that common. We are trying to design our marketing to try and attract a wider range, so we get people who stick, because the people who do become specials are quite successful at getting into the regulars after a few years. So it's a revolving door. Now, that's a good thing, and also it's a bit frustrating in trying to build the numbers and the expertise up. But we also have specials, again, who've been in the specials 20, 30 years and are very happy doing just that. We are refreshing how we work with them. We're looking at making sure that they're getting the job satisfaction that they deserve to get from being volunteers. So in terms of how we use them more, we do. Now, there are differences across Scotland because of the 8 legacy forces. Some were quite tight and some were quite expansive in how they use specials. Therefore, that's one of the things that we're looking at, is what roles do they currently carry out across the country, and how can we make sure that they're doing all the right things. And for my mind, that would be as varied as we believe they can carry out with the training that they have, which is pretty good training. And the public make no differentiation. I mean, people wouldn't be able to tell the difference from the uniform. The powers are exactly the same. It's the experience that's slightly different. So we would be open to any ideas in terms of things that they could carry out. But their main role, and what they usually want to do, is interface with the public at a very community level. Forces in the past have tried doing things like, we see that in your full-time employment you're an accountant. Would you like to help us on our financial analysis? No thanks, I'll get enough of that at work, is the usual answer. I want to put a hat on and go for a walk in the community and talk to the public, is the usual answer that we get from people. And to be honest, I can understand that, but if there were roles, we would be happy to try and entertain, and we do have some who specialise. I haven't got any genius ideas about expanding them, though. If you have, I'm happy to talk to you about it afterwards.
Thank you. Yes, a question there.
Hi, I'm Catherine Topley, the HR Director from Scottish Prison Service. You've spoken quite a lot about the community, partners, specials. What I'm interested to know is, in terms of your legacy 8 forces and bringing them together, you talked about values. How do you work through that transformational change with that group of individuals to support the successful delivery of change and the direction of travel that you want to take the force?
I think the answer is you eat that elephant bit by bit. On the one hand, the 8 forces and the culture in the organisations, the legacy forces, was very similar. And there are reasons for that. Everybody joins with a view of being a police officer, isn't entirely sure what it is, but they all have the same aspirations across the country. They all go through the same basic training at the same place. They wear roughly the same uniform, and many of the experiences are the same. And when they do further specialist training, it tended to be at a national level. So I think people from the outside would look and say it's a pretty homogenous group. But actually, the more you see across Scotland and the more you dig into the legacy forces, you find differences. Now, there are desirable differences and there are undesirable differences. And one of the tricks in doing what you suggested is, well, you have to spot which one's which. Because there are many things done locally which are entirely the right thing to do locally for the local population, because I did say at the start of my speech, what we're trying to do is deliver a bespoke and tailored service across Scotland, not a one-size-fits-all. So each community being policed according to its needs. So it may well be that what they're doing locally is the right thing, in which case we need to make sure that we build a system and a culture which nurtures that, supports it, and then says also, well, it fits the needs there. Is it a better model that we could use somewhere else as well? Or, actually, does it fall into that other category of it's an undesirable local issue? And there are some of those. There are bound to be, because there are goods and bads in any organisation. I'll speak of my old force because it's safer for me to do that. It was 8,500 police officers. It covered 12 local council areas, all the way from the centre of Glasgow out to the islands. There were differences in the way we policed, and some of them were really, really good and appropriate, and some weren't so good. Some, we didn't deal with some kinds of crime effectively. So I think there's this balancing act of the population and the public and the police must realise that there should be a tailored service according to the needs of the community. But if you're a victim of domestic abuse, I think you should be entitled to the same level and professional service no matter where in Scotland you come from, whether it's the centre of a housing estate in Glasgow or Edinburgh, where we would all imagine, oh yeah, domestic abuse, yeah, it's bound to be bad around here, for a variety of preconceptions that we have, all the way out to Orkney and Shetland or the Western Isles, where as a member of a hugely isolated community, perhaps you're even more isolated by the fact that you've been victimised by domestic abuse for years and years. You have nobody to turn to except people who've known you for years and who think this is a rock-solid relationship, and you're imprisoned in that relationship. Is the policing support that we offer those people as good as it is in other parts? The answer is we expect it to be, and we expect that standard to be the same. So it's a complex formula we have to work. Luckily, I have an awful lot of very good people helping me do it. And we are very reliant on senior local people. One of the things that we've done to ensure consistency across Scotland is we've had very little movement of our senior staff. So the people that are in charge locally at divisional level were there before, and they still are there. We haven't changed any of those round. And I think that's helped us with the stability aspect that's essential for a public service the public has to have confidence in.
I think we have room for one more question at least. We'll see how it goes, but ask...
Hi, I'm Maggie Mellon. I'm here as a citizen. I do agree with you that the police aren't responsible for providing housing and jobs and all the other things, but I was a bit surprised to hear you say that problem-solving policing was dead, or I always thought it sounded like such a good idea. And I was reflecting that I think the Christie Commission estimated that a huge amount of something like 40% of public expenditure is spent on failure. So it seems to me we all should be involved in problem solving. And if the police aren't going to be, you might be carrying on doing things that actually create problems. Although within the policing and enforcement thing, they seem quite reasonable. I'm thinking of recent controversy about the stop and search numbers, and also the Edinburgh sauna situation, where you could see the police doing something that they think is totally within their manner, feeling collars and stuff, but actually could be creating other problems. And that seems to me an issue of partnership, the problem-solving bit. So I wonder if you could say a bit more about that, why you're against it.
Crikey, where to start? Let me just wind back a little bit. I don't remember saying the words problem-solving policing is dead, but I did refer to problem-solving policing. But nonetheless, I think your point's a really good one and a very interesting one. My proposal is this, that policing, pure simple policing, stop and search. Let's pick stop and search. Stop and search is a control tactic. Stop and search, we know, we can prove, has changed behaviour in Glasgow. Gang activity has dropped away. There are some parts of Glasgow where people say gangs are historic. They don't exist anymore. There are many reasons for that. A big one, stop and search. Has it changed? The fact that people who are gang members are likely, when they go out after a certain hour, to be stopped by the police. Has that changed their behaviour? Yes. They won't carry weapons. They probably won't associate with the gang members anymore. They may not go to the same locations, which would be violence hotspots, because that's why we would be doing the stopping and searching. Has it changed the way they think and the way they actually want to behave? Probably not. It's controlled their behaviour. It hasn't changed their behaviour inside. And the reason for that is because I think what changes people's behaviour is actually the biggest solution for gangs is people grow up. They become older and a bit more mature. Often they get into a stable relationship, and the pressure then is on settling down, finding somewhere to live, finding a job. It's the education, it's the housing, it's the job, it's the ability to operate a stable relationship, to bring up children, which is challenging in itself, but to do so effectively and well, to bring up happy children, to bring up non-violent children, to parent in a way that doesn't lead to another violent generation. These are not things the police can do. So we can stabilise and we can control certain aspects of behaviour, but we have to work in partnership, and really that was the central point of what I was trying to say. We have to work in partnership with the agencies that provide the housing, that will look to provide the education and the jobs. So I'm not saying that policing doesn't deal in problem solving. I'm saying it can't do it on its own. It's not a single agency to do that. We can control and actually I think the word is, I don't know what the English dictionary definition of policing is, but part of it is there's a verb in there. You police. How do you do that? Well, to me it speaks of control. It speaks of restrictions. It speaks of certain things are right and certain things are wrong, and we will allow the right and we will try and stop the wrong. We'll try and keep people safe. I don't think that makes people stop wanting to do the wrong things. I think what changes the behaviour is they get a job, they get education, they understand, they get more empathy, they understand other people's situation, they talk their anger through with counsellors, understand where it's coming from and can control it better. They become better parents. The next generation is brought up differently and better because we're trying to break that cycle. We can only do that with partners. Cops can't do that sort of thing, but our partners can. We can control the now. Our partners can change the future, is my view on it. I hope that helps a little bit. You don't look too convinced. Your arms are still folded, you see, so I tried.
Thank you very much. I think that will be our last question. I would like to thank you for your questions, for the discussion, and I'm going to end this part of the evening so that we have time for reception and our networking, and you can continue some of the discussions after that. I'll ask Stephen to join the table here, and I'll hand over to Alan Staff, Chief Executive in APEX Scotland, to formally wind up the evening's events so far.
Thank you, Martin. It's always dangerous to allow the Chief Exec to have the final word, so I've been allocated the thanks, and it's my pleasure to do so. Thank you, first of all, thank you for coming and for supporting this event. Particular thanks this evening, obviously, to Sir Stephen Howes for what I think has been a stimulating and frank insight into his thoughts, both on the role, on the challenges of bringing together a single police force for Scotland, but also on the challenges of working in a new environment, working in an environment where there are severe financial restrictions, working in an environment where there are extraordinary expectations, extraordinary exposure, both in the media and to the public generally. And I think that tonight has been very, very helpful. I think if you are an organisation, a partner organisation or a potential partner organisation that is committed to working well, to proving your success, to demonstrating what you do works, I think you have nothing to fear. I think, in fact, what we've heard tonight has been very reassuring. I think if you're an organisation that maybe doesn't feel that it needs to do that, I'd watch out. I think we've heard that message very strongly. I will have the message, successful partnerships keep people safe, enshrined on a poster and put on a wall somewhere in the office. I think that was helpful, and I think that's something that we may well refer to over the coming years and hopefully remind Sir Stephen of at every possible opportunity. Apex prides itself on bringing together challenging and topical speakers for these events, and I hope you'll agree that tonight has been both very, very topical, very, very timely, and frank, and, as I say, a real, real insight. So I'd like you to join me in thanking Sir Stephen. There are a number of other thanks I have to give tonight. Thank you, as always, to the staff, the excellent staff here at the Signet Library for this wonderful, wonderful venue and all the help that they give us. And we're always pleased to be here. Thank you to Blue Lizard for PA and recording, and the transcript and the recording will be on our website at some point in the future when we can get them put on. To Heritage Portfolio for the catering, which hopefully you'll be enjoying in a moment or two. And last but very definitely not least, Lynn Hanna and all of the others that have been working busily with her to make this evening run as smoothly as it has. Lynn, thank you very much. It only remains for me to invite you to our reception behind these screens here, where you can carry on the discussions and also hopefully meet the winners of our annual Quality and Innovation Awards, the Betty Crawford and Sam Dow trophies. By a happy coincidence, with no prompting or pre-rehearsal, the two winners this year are in fact Glasgow, for their innovative work alongside the Glasgow Safety Service, the Community Safety Services Glasgow, and the police, which you've heard of, and also the inclusion team, which you also heard of. So I'm delighted, the coincidence. The inclusion team have paved the way for expansion. They've managed to show that you can transfer what was recognised generally as a good model into other schools and make it work there, and they're basking in the current glory of having just picked up the Kingdom FM Local Hero Award. So go and meet them and see what they're doing, have a chat, and I'm sure they'll be more than happy to talk about to you about what they do and about their enthusiasm for what they do. So it only remains for me to close the 2013 Apex lecture and wish those of you that can't stay safe home. Good night.